Look, I was an independent during the time of Reagan-Bush. I'm not trying to return to Reagan-Bush.
Under the Reagan-Bush economic program, under the economic program you want to return to, the total number of children that are living in poverty, the total number of children out of wedlock. This has happened, you know, we've had Republican presidents during this period of time, and the cutting back of support systems for children, and most of all, for families to get jobs. If you're not going to provide a climate and an atmosphere for men and women to be able to work and provide for their children, you're going to see the breakdown of the family as well. And under your economic program, under the program of Mr. Reagan and Mr. Bush, we saw the growth in terms of the unemployment, the growth in the number of children living in poverty, the growth in terms of those children out of wedlock. I would much rather say that this isn't a narrow political hit, so to speak.
Senator, you talked about how important this was and not to make political hits. I mentioned nothing about politics or your position at all. I talked about what I do to help strengthen families, and you talked about Reagan-Bush. Look, I was an independent during the time of Reagan-Bush. I'm not trying to return to Reagan-Bush. My positions don't talk about things that you suggest they talk about. This isn't a political issue. That's why I raised it, to talk about something other than a political issue.
Senator
Let's not
Kennedy,
get into credit and blame
please.
on something so important.
Senator Kennedy.
Governor, I'm a conservative blogger, and I agree with a lot of the points that you put forth as part of your campaign. One of the things that's really been nagging me for a long time is there's a video out on YouTube from the 1994 debate with Ted Kennedy. And you said some things about Ronald Reagan that really, quite frankly, I have a hard time squaring with the Mitt Romney of today. What do you say to somebody that agrees with you, like I do, but yet is uneasy about that particular event?
Well, I think you're probably referring to the quote that said back then in 1994 that I said I wasn't going to return to the days of Ronald Reagan. And back at that time, I was concerned that lowering taxes without lowering spending would create big deficits and would be a problem for our economy. Well, you know what? The proof was in the pudding that Ronald Reagan was right. And over time, we were able to keep our taxes down, grow our economy, grow our way out of those deficits, and he was right. And what I found is that the older I get, the smarter Ronald Reagan gets.
So would you say you were wrong at that time?
Well, let's just say that it's a good thing that Ronald Reagan was president.
Let me ask you about a statement you made last week that caught the attention of a lot of Republicans, including Senator McCain, when you said, "I'm the real Republican in this race." I remember back when you were quoted as saying, "I was an independent during the Reagan-Bush days." That was when you voted for Paul Tsongas, who was a Democratic candidate for president. And
Bob,
you said
we
in
got
those
to
days,
fix some of those things.
you said in those days, "I'm not trying to return to Reagan-Bush." Now you're proclaiming yourself the real Republican. You believe, you're quoted as saying, you believe the party's ascendancy began with Ronald Reagan's vision, and you are saying you won't beat Hillary Rodham Clinton acting like Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely. Where do you want to start?
Well, I mean, this is not like a change in position. It's like a change in philosophy.
That's not true at all. And there's no question that the older I get, the smarter Ronald Reagan gets. But also, I never voted for Paul Tsongas in a general election. I voted for a Republican every time there was a Republican on the ballot. So some of these things are
But
ancient.
you voted for him in a primary.
Yeah, I voted in the Democratic primary, as a lot of Republicans in Massachusetts do, because when there's no contest of significance on the Republican side, when you register as an independent, you can vote in the Democratic primary and vote against Bill Clinton. I used to vote against Ted Kennedy, all right? So that's something that you get to do. But look, I was a Republican through and through. My dad ran for president. I was in the Republican Club when I was in college. I'm a Republican, always have been.
But
now,
why let me just interrupt you. Why did you say, "I'm not trying to return to Reagan-Bush"?
Well, when I was running in '94, I wasn't trying to return to Reagan-Bush, because that was characterized as a very different posture than what I was running for. I was talking about my own vision. I wasn't trying to be a copy of anybody else. I was trying to say what I wanted to do and laid out my position. I wanted the death penalty reinstated. I wanted to make sure that our welfare programs were reformed. I wanted to get tough on crime. So I had my own posture. And Senator Kennedy in the debate was saying, oh, you're just turning yourself into Reagan Bush. I said, no, I'm my own person. So my views go back a long time. I come from a Republican family. And also, you know, the idea that I'm the only real Republican, I'm not the only real Republican. John McCain's a real Republican. So Rudy Giuliani, there are a lot of real Republicans. I'm not the only one, but I'm one. And I believe in the principles of my party and believe that the only way that we're going to take the White House is not by acting like Hillary Clinton, but by holding true to the principles of our party, which is a coalition of social, economic, and foreign policy conservatives. And you know, being a Republican in Massachusetts, the most liberal state in America, that takes some backbone, and that's what I've done.
So who is the Republican who's acting like Hillary Rodham Clinton?
I'm going to let other people figure that out, but that's the wrong way to go. We don't want to turn left as a party. We want to adhere to our principles. I think amnesty and immigration is the wrong way to go. I think fighting against the line item veto and taking that all the way to the Supreme Court, as Mayor Giuliani did, that was the wrong way to go. So we'll talk about our differences. I think McCain-Feingold, the campaign finance bill, was the wrong way to go. But these are differences on issues. Doesn't mean someone's not a real Republican. I didn't say anyone was not a real Republican. But I want to bring together a coalition of Republicans that is the winning coalition. Because I think there's a view on the part of some that to win the White House, we've got to turn left and act more like the Democrats. I think that's exactly wrong. I think to win the White House, we've got to stay true to Republican principles and values.
I've got a message to the people in Framingham today. They're not here. That's where Bill Weld is. Hold on to your wallet. The taxers are there. The taxers and spenders, the guys who put together the biggest tax increase in the history of the nation, are there explaining why they need more of your money. The people who went to the middle class and raised taxes on the middle class are there for more. The people who said to the senior citizens, we need to raise taxes on Social Security benefits, are there in Framingham. The people who took $1 billion out of the Massachusetts economy and sent it to Washington are there in Framingham. And thank heavens Bill Weld stood up and said, enough. We don't want to have all that money going to Washington, D.C. Did you realize... Did you realize that the average working class family, the average middle class family of America, sends 40% of its money every year to government? 40%. When are they going to be willing to draw the line? There was a debate in Washington not long ago, and I'm not even sure Ted Kennedy knows and understands and cares how much the middle class is suffering for the tax burden. Because in that debate, he accused one of his fellow Democratic senators, and I quote, of caring only for the middle class. Well, what does he think the backbone of this country is? Who are the people who are working day in and day out, who are making the products and delivering the services to our nation and to the world? Who are the people that are carrying the burden of the taxes on their backs? I aim to help Ted Kennedy come back to the real world. You get down to Washington too long, you stop listening, you stop hearing, you stop knowing what people are doing throughout this state and throughout this country. It's time for him to be able to come back to Hyannis, spend a little more time in Massachusetts, except on election years, and live and work with real people in the real world. Because you see, in the real world, neither the people who are on welfare nor the people who are paying for welfare think that that's the answer to getting people back to work. In the real world, people recognize, who are senior citizens, that you don't want to have recovering drug addicts moving into housing centers that were placed for senior citizens. In the real world, senior citizens recognize they don't need to have higher taxes placed on Social Security. In the real world that you and I live on, you can't get a special deal with a government agency on a no-bid basis like he did with the city of Washington, D.C. You can't also rent facilities to the government of the United States that you're supposedly overseeing a particular department and getting that money back to yourself. In the real world, we have to live by the rules that are passed for all citizens and can't live above them. Things are different. Things are different in the real world than they are down that world of Washington, D.C. And in my view, it is absolutely essential for us to send to Washington, D.C. a person who subscribes to the philosophy that Bill Weld
has manifest here in Massachusetts. And that is a philosophy of saying we can increase the growth of our economy by cutting our taxes. We can balance a budget. We can have real welfare reform. We can get tough on crime. And with all of the talk, it's time to finally take action in Washington, D.C. I'm convinced it's fine for Bill and Ted to have their excellent adventure today, but I'd rather be here with Bill Weld, showing that this is a place that we care about taxes, about real jobs being created, about being tough on crime, and being tough on welfare. Thank you for your help. Let's do it.
Ronald Reagan would look at the issues that are being debated right here and say, one, we're going to win in Iraq, and I'm not going to walk out of Iraq until we win Iraq. Ronald Reagan would say lower taxes. Ronald Reagan would say lower spending. Ronald Reagan is pro-life. He'd also say, I want to have an amendment for marriage to protect marriage. Ronald Reagan would say, as I do, that Washington is broken. And like Ronald Reagan, I'd go to Washington as an outsider, not owing favors, not lobbyists on every elbow. I'd be able to be the independent outsider that Ronald Reagan was, and he brought change to Washington. Ronald Reagan would say, yeah, let's drill in Anwar. Ronald Reagan would say, no way are we going to have amnesty again. Ronald Reagan saw it. It didn't work. Let's not do it again. Ronald Reagan would say no to a 50-cent per gallon charge on Americans for energy that the rest of the world doesn't have to pay. Ronald Reagan would have said, absolutely no way to McCain-Feingold. I'd be with Ronald Reagan. This party, it has a choice. And what the heart and the soul of this party is going to be, and it's going to have to be in the house that Ronald Reagan built.